Welcome back to program number 3. This is the third in our accelerated NLP training series. And it's time to talk about presuppositions, the presuppositions of NLP. If you want to, why don't you turn to page 12 in your notebook and you can follow along. The presuppositions of NLP are convenient beliefs. They're beliefs that structure our reality as we do the techniques and processes of NLP. And I guess the nearest English equivalent or the nearest word in plain English is assumptions. The presuppositions of NLP are assumptions. They're they're beliefs that we adopt. Now, they're not necessarily true, but they filter our perceptions. As you'll remember from our fellow in the NLP communication model on page 7, that values and beliefs and attitudes are part of what filter our external reality as it comes in and becomes an internal representation. So by adopting certain beliefs, we can increase our results in NLP over and above having beliefs which are disenabling or which don't provide us with the proper belief system in order to produce great results. One of my students once said to me, "Tad, I really like working with you because you think that everybody is magnificent and everybody can change and everybody can become wonderful." Well, the way I look at it is we really all have great potentiality of which we're unaware and perhaps incapable at the moment of accessing. But that all we have to do is get rid of some bit of covering or something that covers it up, and each person can access their own magnificence and produce the kind of results they want to. Now, if I didn't believe that, what would happen is I'd get up in the morning and I perhaps would work with clients, and I'd be sitting across from a client, and as I looked at the client, I might say to myself, whoa, this person can't produce any results. What am I doing working with them? Well, the fact is that if we adopt these beliefs, if we adopt certain beliefs, what's going to happen is our results will be better. The results we produce with clients will be better. And so the presuppositions of NLP are essentially convenient assumptions, things that we assume or beliefs that we assume or that we put on, and they structure everything that we do while we're doing NLP. The outcome then is that it's going to change my behavior. And the kind of change it's going to produce in my behavior is that it's going to improve my results. So by adopting these beliefs, I can improve my results. Now in hypnosis, this fact has been known for years. George Estabrook in 1943 in Hypnotism and Andre Weitzenhofer in 1957 in the book General Techniques of Hypnotism both said essentially the same thing, that the client in hypnosis will not produce results which the hypnotist does not believe are possible. That's real important from the point of view of NLP, because what it means is that we can change our beliefs and improve our results. So the presuppositions of NLP are convenient beliefs which I think are necessary and which are for the purpose of structuring our perceptions when we work with clients. As you go through this training, we're going to ask you to actualize those convenient beliefs. We're going to actually ask you to accept them when you do NLP and make those beliefs part of what you believe, and also structure your perceptions and hopefully will change your behavior. Part of what we'll be doing as you come to the training to take the training is we'll be watching to make sure that you've actualized those beliefs in your external behavior. When you get to the training, you may want to ask questions about them, but let's go through and see what they are. First of all, and that's on page 12. We've given you a mnemonic device to make it very easy to remember them. And you probably won't need to remember them just yet, but by the time you come and take the trainer's training, you'll want to. The first one is respect for the other person's model of the world. Now, by respect, that doesn't mean we have to accept it. It doesn't mean we don't change it. It simply means that we respect it and enter into it. If a client comes to you and says something that's like totally off the wall, and you're sitting there wondering, whoa, that's so crazy. If you were at that point to say, boy, that's nuts and you're out of your skull, that probably wouldn't be the best way to approach them. The best way to approach them would be to accept it and enter into it. There was a practitioner who had somebody walk in one time and said, I see people on television and they come down off the television set and they follow me around. And the practitioner said, who is it that's following you around? And the client said, well, it's Mary from the reruns of Little House on the Prairie. Now, of all the people this guy could have chosen, he had Mary following him around. So the question, was the practitioner going to say, no, that's crazy? No, what he said was, of all the people that you've chosen, does the term Playboy channel have any meaning for you? I mean, if you're going to have people come down off the television set and follow you around, at least you ought to pick someone that's worthwhile. Now, that's respecting the client's model of the world. So if the client walks in and says, I'm talking to UFOs, can you help me? Whether it's a good thing or not, it depends on how they're doing with it, obviously. But you're going to say, yes, certainly. And you might even say, well, I've gotten a message from UFOs and here's one for you. So the fact is that you'd use the client's model of the world, you'd respect it, and use the client's model of the world in assisting them in creating the kind of changes they wanted to. And that's essentially what that means. Okay, number 2, behavior and change are to be evaluated in terms of the context in which they occur and the ecology of the change. That's real important. So let's look at that one. In general, we want to evaluate something that happens, whatever the client gives us. We want to evaluate that in terms of the context that occurs, in which it occurs. And that means what's going on around the client and the ecology of what the client's asking us to do. For example, if someone comes to you and says, I'd like to have more energy all the time. Ask yourself for a moment, is that appropriate? It may not be appropriate for you to, for example, make a change with a client that's going to give them more energy all the time. Because if you did, the person might not sleep very well. So in this case, we want to evaluate that particular change in terms of the context that it occurs and the ecology of making that change. Number 3, resistance in a client is a sign of a lack of rapport. Now, we believe that there aren't resistant clients. We believe they're only inflexible communicators. Effective communicators accept and utilize all the communication presented to them. Number 4, people are not their behaviors. I think this is also important because what it does is it allows you to accept the person and change the behavior. A person's behavior is not who they are. And so if we jump down to number 6, we're going to notice that the most important information about a person is that person's behavior, but we're also going to remember that the person is not their behavior. What does that mean? Well, what it means is that you see and I see personally everyone is magnificent, and we assist them in actualizing that magnificence. So clearly you're more than your behavior. In fact, whatever behavior you could think of, you know you're more than that, don't you? I think you know that already. You know that you're more than what, in fact, whoever you could conceive of yourself to be. See, if we walked up to 100 people on the street and we said, who are you? They might say, well, and they probably would be talking about their behavior. Well, I'm a lawyer, or I'm an artist, or I'm a banker, or I'm a judge, or I'm a housewife, or I'm a hypnotherapist. But that's simply your behavior. It's not who you are, per se. So in NLP, we believe that people are more than their behaviors. They're not just their behaviors. They're not only their behaviors. And we're going to accept the person and change the behavior which they produce. I think this is real important, especially when you're working with kids, and especially with working with kids with learning disabilities. I don't believe in learning disabilities, by the way. And they bring in the kids and they say, this child has a learning disability. And I say, well, what is he learning, or what is she learning that she shouldn't be? Better yet, when a child comes in who's dyslexic, I say, well, what are you good at? I worked with a 17-year-old boy who was dyslexic, and they wanted to give him Ritalin. And they said he's got attention deficit disorder. And they wanted to put him on a drug which would reduce the attention deficit disorder behavior in class. And so I said to him, the first thing I said to him was, what are you good at? And he says, I can take apart an automobile engine and put it back together without a diagram. What a wonderful skill. I mean, this guy was really good. He was so good he could take apart the entire engine, put it back together with no diagram. And how was he doing it, do you think? Because if he didn't have a diagram, if he had nothing to look at, how was he doing it? Well, he was probably doing it kinesthetically with his feelings, with his hands, or with his sensations. Now, he wasn't really dyslexic. He was just using the wrong representational system to process the information. And we'll discover that later when we get into that section. But what a wonderful skill this boy had. And then I worked with a 9-year-old boy who they branded dyslexic, and I said to him, what are you good at? And he said, I'm excellent in skateboarding. In fact, he said, I'm going to be the state champion of my state. Now that's interesting because most of the people who are dyslexic have really got a highly developed kinesthetic external representational system. The thing about learning disabilities, by the way, is it's impossible for a human being not to learn. The human being is a learning machine. We learn and learn and learn no matter what. Learning disability simply means the child is learning something, that he or she's not supposed to. Now, if we take someone and brand them dyslexic, or better yet, attention deficit, my question is, under what circumstances? And when does he or she forget to do that? I mean, think about think about the meaning of the words attention deficit. If you really had attention deficit, you'd be dead. Try turning down your attention for just a minute. I mean, try turning it down. If you had a little, little thermostat in your brain that you could turn down your attention. Try turning down your attention for just a minute. What does that mean? Well, what it really means is that the child is not that they've turned down their attention. It means they're paying attention to something he or she shouldn't be. So what I'd like to know is, what is the child doing that he or she shouldn't be doing? And who says? See, if all meaning is context dependent, then attention deficit doesn't have any meaning in certain contexts. Now, I don't accept labels as being meaningful because all meaning is dependent in a certain context. And I'd like to know under what circumstance is the child not bouncing off the ceiling? And are there some cases where the child is not bouncing off those ceiling? And how can I extend those circumstances? So the words we use have a certain context. And if we label someone, if we say this person is their behavior, how could that be true? Because is someone attention deficit disorder when they're asleep? I mean, everyone sleeps, we think. So I think it's important to, when you look at a person, to not label them. Certainly to not label them as their behavior. That will allow us to accept the person and change the behavior. I was a number of years ago on a panel at the Erickson Congress with Stephen Gilligan. And Dr. Gilligan got up and he said, I think we were talking to about 600 people. And Dr. Gilligan got up and he said, "I'm no longer diagnosing my clients." And the gasp in the audience was audible. I mean, people went, and one fellow in the back of the hand raised his hand, and back of the room raised his hand and yelled out, "Well, how in the world are you getting the insurance?" And Stephen said, "I'm checking the other box. You get it just as many hours if you check the other box as if you check the certain diagnosis." Well, I think that's real important. If we label people as their behaviors, then what's going to happen is we put them in a box. And if we, as the NLP practitioner, put our clients in a box, what's going to happen is that we'll have less belief that they can change. And if we have less belief that they can change, then we'll have lesser results. Okay, enough. Number 5, everyone is doing the best they can with the resources they have available. Now that means essentially that behavior is geared toward adaptation and that the present behavior is the best choice available. That means whatever choice a person is producing, that's the best choice they've got available at the moment. And every behavior, we believe, is motivated by a positive intention, even if it's a really, really, really negative behavior. That means if somebody exhibits a behavior to you which is bizarre, or maybe they're being a bit of a jerk, they're only adapting or doing the best they can with that behavior that they have. It's the only behavior maybe that they have in the present situation. What's interesting about that is that lets people off the hook, doesn't it? Does that include you? Well, of course it does. This is, by the way, this is the NLP presupposition of forgiveness. People say to me all the time, "Where's forgiveness in NLP?" Well, this is it. Forgiveness is everyone's doing the best they can with the resources they have available, and that includes you. That means in the past, for all the things, all the misdeeds that you did in the past, you can certainly let yourself off the hook. I don't know, have you ever acted in the past as something less than the magnificent person that I know you are? Have you? Because I certainly have. Well, what that means essentially is that you were only doing the best with the resources that you had at the time. And that implies forgiveness. And so you can. Good. Number 6. The most important thing we want to pay attention to is we want to calibrate on behavior. We want to pay attention to someone's behavior. And what that means is the most important thing is their behavior and not what they tell us. Regardless of what a person says, we're going to judge by behavior. One of my favorite ones, of course, is I say to you, "Let's have lunch," and you say, "Well, I'll try." And by the way, I haven't told you to do it yet necessarily, right? Or you haven't said you're going to do it yet. Well, if you haven't done this one, let's do this together. This is kind of fun. If you haven't done Try with me yet at A Secret of Creating Your Future or any other one of my seminars, let's do this. Why don't you take your pen and place it in your left hand. Take your left hand, turn your left hand palm up, and take your pen and put your pen in your left hand. Now, in a moment, what we're going to try to do is we're going to try to pick up our pen. You ready? Here we go. 1, 2, 3, go. Did you pick up your pen? Because if you picked up your pen, you didn't try. Did you? You didn't try. In English, the word try essentially means I'm not going to do it. In fact, if we want someone not to do something, we often tell them in hypnosis, I want you to try and really try. And by the way, the word try implies a lot of effort, but not doing it. So the most important information about a person is that person's behavior. We always calibrate on the person's behavior. By the way, numbers 3, 4, 5, and 6, a lot of these are about behavior. So go back, actually number 2 also. So go back and look at those now. Behavior and change are to be evaluated in terms of context. Resistance in a client, which is a behavior, is simply a sign of lack of rapport. People are not their behaviors. Everyone's doing the best they can with the resources they have available, and we calibrate on their behavior. Those are some really nice presuppositions which allow us to treat the client, I think, quite a bit differently. All right, let's move on and look at number 7. Presupposition number 7 is that the map's not the territory. Now, what that says is it says that the words that we use are not the event or the item that they represent. See, here's the thing, and we'll talk about this exercise as we get later on, move on in the training. Each person has a different map of what a word means inside of them. Everyone has a different meaning for a certain word. If I were to talk to you about what I believe the word love means, for example, I would have a lot different meaning than you would have. And if we took the word picnic and each of us defined the word picnic to our own satisfaction, every one of us would have a different meaning for the word picnic. So inside each human being is a structure of the meaning of the words, structure of the meaning of the words. And we have no idea if the person we're talking to has had similar experiences as we've had or different experiences we had. In fact, we can probably count on the fact that their experiences will be quite a bit different from ours. And so each of us have different words that we use to structure our thinking. And that's what the map is not the territory means. It means each person uses and thinks about an event in a different way. And so I'm going to use words that produce the most results in you, not necessarily what are the words that produce results in me. Now that's important. NLP is a description of the human being from a context or a process or a structural point of view. We're less interested in the content of NLP, or in the content when we're looking at NLP, as opposed to noticing a pattern that occurs, or structure of behavior, or in what context does this client produce this behavior. So we don't need to spend 15 years finding out about the details of someone's personal history. It's simply not that meaningful. Now the question is, how do you get to context or structure? How do you move to discover the context or the structure of some behavior? Well, you certainly get some content. But each time you pay attention to the content, what you're looking for the structure that it represents. And that's all tied up in this presupposition, the map is not the territory, which essentially says the words we use are not the event or item they represent. All right, number 8. You're in charge of your mind and therefore your results, and I'm also in charge of my mind, and I'm also therefore in charge of my own results. What that means is that if I can structure my thinking so that I hold a positive outcome, a positive representation in my mind, if I can totally focus on what I want to have happen, then I can produce the kind of results I want. I have a real clear experience of this in my own life. I used to wake up in the morning and either have a good day or a bad day. And then one day I learned, lo and behold, that I was actually in charge of my own state. I was in charge of my own mind. If you look at page 7, our little communication model there, I realized that everything, all the results that I produced, all of the behavior, everything I did was dependent upon that internal representation which I held in my mind. So how do you control that internal representation? Or how is it that I discover that I'm in charge of my mind? Well, one of the questions that we ask in NLP a lot is, who's driving the bus? Who's driving your bus? Who's driving your brain? It's a real good question, because most people run their brains as though there was no one at home, no one in charge. In fact, most people allow their brains to run on and on and on. They allow their conscious mind or their unconscious mind to run on and on and on. And the fact is that someone does need to be in charge. In fact, I think it's one of the major presuppositions of NLP that people are in charge of their thinking, and therefore in charge of the results that they produce. To say that you have no choice over your thoughts doesn't include the function of conscious mind. Because the fact is, for example, think of a blue tree. You can choose to think of a blue tree, or you can choose to change your thinking and think about something else at any given moment. Now, if there are lousy thoughts going on in your head, the fact is that you're in charge of them. And in NLP, we totally believe that we're in charge of the thinking, that the conscious mind actually is and has the responsibility of being in charge of the thinking, of all the thoughts that you think. So the way I figure it is, if you're going to be in a bad state, if you're going to pick a negative state to be in, you might as well schedule it, since you're in charge of your own state. If you have to be in a negative state, why not schedule it for a certain time of day? One of the things, I worked with one client once who said, oh, I have to be sad at least a certain amount of the time every day. So I said to the client, well, could you be sad, for example? I mean, if you really wanted to, couldn't you be sad from 3 a.m. to 5 a.m.? I mean, and really do a good job of being sad when there's no one else around and nothing else going on, so that you could totally focus on it. I mean, couldn't you totally focus on being sad from 3 a.m. to 5 a.m. so that there wouldn't be anything else to do? Well, the client thought about it and thought that he could. We said, yeah, sure, I could do that. Now, see, what's really nice about that is that lets him off the hook. That totally lets him off the hook. Because the client then can be sad whenever at night, whenever it's not going to bother him. And during the day, he can produce great results. So the fact is, you're in charge of your mind, and you're in charge of the kind of results you produce by your thinking. And of course, that's what the intent of page 7 was. If you go back, and if you want to look and see how it works, this is how it works. It's on page 7. So if you look at page 7, we've got the external event coming in through this guy's filters. They delete, distort, and generalize. And then they come inside, and he makes an internal representation, which is intimately coupled to a state, intimately coupled to a physiology, and which ends up producing a certain behavior. All right, number 9. People have all the ability they need to succeed. And there are no unresourceful people, only unresourceful states. See, if we have all the ability we need to succeed, that means, and all the resources, it means we have all the resources we need to achieve our desired outcomes. So we believe in NLP that everyone has the ability to be able to do what they want to do, that they have the ability to succeed at whatever they want to succeed at. All that we need to do is either to add the resources necessary to allow them to be able to, or to get rid of what prevents them from being able to do it. Now, I think that that's a useful belief. I think that's a real useful belief for us to have. Well, let me give you a couple examples of why I believe that's a real useful belief. First of all, it means there's no limitation in terms of a person's ability to learn. And I don't believe, by the way, in terms of intelligence. I don't think that intelligence rules the kind of grades that a kid gets in school. I do believe that there are useful strategies and there are unuseful strategies. For example, the 9-year-old boy that I worked with who wanted to be skateboard champion of his state, and he came to me and he said, I said to him, how do you spell success? And he looked downward and to the left as I looked at him. And of course, that's kinesthetic. And he was trying to spell success through his kinesthetics, which made a lot of sense for his skateboarding, but not really real good for for spelling, which generally is done visually. So I showed him how to look up. I showed him how to access, using his eye patterns, how to access visual recall. And I said to him, I began by saying, how do you spell success? And he couldn't spell it. Well, he couldn't spell it because he was looking down and to the left as you look at him. So I showed him how to access visual recall, which essentially means as you look at the person, he was looking up and to the right. by the time I showed him how to put the word up there and literally get the word up into visual recall and use his eye patterns in the way that they were constructed, he was spelling it backward and forward like a champ. Recently, we worked with a 12-year-old girl, almost the same situation. She had ADD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder this time, and she was also dyslexic. And so we showed her in a matter of minutes how to spell success, and she was spelling it forward and backward, which, by the way, is the test. You can always tell the kid's visualizing if you have them spell it backward. And we'll get on to this as we get into strategies. How do you actually work with a child and assist them in making a change in their spelling strategy so they can spell correctly? Now, here's the problem. Most of the people have been telling the kid, you can't do this, so you're stupid. And the kid isn't stupid. Anyone who's dealt with learning disabilities, you know that most people who are learning disabled are probably above average intelligence. It's not about the intelligence. It's simply about the learning strategy they're using. So we believe that all people have the ability to succeed inside themselves, that they have the ability inside themselves to succeed, that they have all the resources they need, and that we only need to put them in touch with those resources. Another issue here is that the fact is that the child has been brought up or has been told that they're not good or that they can't do this. And of course, a lot of times people are going to respond to that. It's a matter of your beliefs again, or the teacher's beliefs, reflecting on to the results that the child produces. And I really think that as you work with people, you're going to discover that if you change your own beliefs and you make your own beliefs more unlimited, what's going to happen is you'll produce way better results, and so will your clients. Now, this is really interesting. Everyone's got the ability to learn. Human beings are learning machines. If we were to take a rat and put a rat in an enriched environment, in about 45 minutes, that rat's brain weight would change. An enriched environment means an environment where a rat has to learn something. Now, a human's brain is going to change in a matter of moments. If we put a human in an enriched environment where the human being is going to learn something, what will happen is that the human being will learn something, and the brain weight will probably change in a matter of moments. When they cut open Einstein's brain after he died, they said, look at the size of this guy's brain. He had so much gray matter, and his brain was heavier than the average brain. And so they said at the time, Einstein's brain was so much larger than the average person, and that's why he thought the thoughts he did. But think about that for just a minute. Was Einstein's brain larger because, and that allowed him to think the thoughts he did, or was it larger because he had thought the thoughts he had for his entire lifetime? Well, in NLP, of course, we believe that the brain is used, and the use of that brain will increase the brain weight. In fact, there is some research to that. If you read Mega Brain by Michael Hutchinson, 1986, and it's been revised since then. If you read Hutchinson, what you'll find is that just an enriched environment can change the thinking of a human being and also increase the brain weight, which means that essentially the kinds of changes we make with a person will enrich their life and also enrich their ability to think. And if we do that, then the change that we make, there's no such thing as intelligence when it comes to performance. So, back to number 9, we do believe that people have all the resources they need to succeed and to produce the kind of changes and the kind of outcomes that they want. All right, let's look at number 10. All procedures should increase wholeness. To me, this is a very important presupposition in our little branch of NLP. By the way, I may say this a few times if you come and take trainings with me, that in our little branch of NLP, we think this way. What I mean by that is myself and the people that I've taught, we generally tend to believe that all procedures should increase wholeness. There are some trainers of NLP who actually install parts and who assist people installing parts because they say it increases their flexibility of behavior. But my point of view is that our procedures should increase wholeness and not fragmentation. So if we're going to do any kind of an intervention, it should increase the wholeness of the individual. I think people are too fragmented as they are, as it is, or that too many possibilities for fragmentation exist, and that the more we can do to increase wholeness and decrease internal conflict, the better it is. Okay, number 11. There's only feedback, which essentially says there's no failure, there's only feedback. This is important too. I think as you get better and better at producing any kind of behavior, the possibility of giving you really good feedback gets less and less. So I think, first of all, we should always welcome feedback because it's what's going to allow us to improve our behavior and to get better and better. Now, if you come and take one of our trainings, you'll be receiving feedback. In fact, during the training, we often say to people, the best thing that you can do is to simply listen to the feedback, incorporate the feedback, take it inside yourself, and thank the other person for it, rather than trying to justify your behavior, or even worse, saying, oh, I'm no good. No, the thing to do is just change your behavior. If everything that happens is only feedback and you're a learning machine, then, for example, let's say I'm going to hypnotize someone and they don't go into a trance in the first 5 minutes. So what do I say? Oh, I'm no good at hypnosis? No, that's not what I say. I'll try a different induction. If 1 or 2 inductions don't work, I'll try 3 or 4 other ones. The fact is that if I'm continually getting feedback and I'm continually paying attention to it, and I'm continually using that feedback, then what's going to happen is I'm going to improve my behavior so I can create the kind of results that I want. If you're communicating with someone and you don't get the response you want, what do you do? What do you do? You simply change your communication so that there's no failure. There's only feedback. And it's real important as you go through a training, or actually any learning situation, whether or not you come and take our trainings. It's really important that as you go through any learning situation that you go through, it's really important for you to consider that what you're receiving is really adequate feedback, hopefully, which will improve your ability to learn and allow you to change your behavior so that you can produce the kind of results that you want to produce. All right, let's look at number 12. Number 12 is the meaning of communication is the response that you get. I remember before NLP, I took a number of trainings where you could actually walk up to someone and dump a whole bunch of stuff on them and say, if you don't like it, that's your stuff. I don't know if you remember that. I'm actually embarrassed by that at this point. It seems like if you're standing there communicating to someone, and I'm standing here communicating to you and you're standing there communicating to me, who's responsible for the communication? Well, both people. Now, when I took my master's degree in communication at Syracuse University, the professor got up and he drew on the board a communication diagram, and he said, okay, now there's 2 people in this communication. Who's responsible for it? And of course, we finally ended up at the end of the class agreeing that each person was responsible for it 50%, so that each person had a 50-50% responsibility. Well, in NLP, we go a little further than that. In NLP, we say each person has 100% responsibility for communicating things, or for being able to produce the kind of results that they want through the communication that they communicate. See, here's the first thing. If I give up 50% of my responsibility to you, and you give up 50% of your responsibility to me, then how am I going to change my behavior? How am I going to change my behavior to produce the kind of results that I want? So if the meaning of communication is a response that I get in you, then it puts the responsibility on me to change my behavior sufficiently so that I produce those kind of results. Let's look at it another way. If I don't take 100% responsibility for my communication with you, then to the extent that I don't have full responsibility, for that extent, I don't get to change what I'm doing. And if I don't get to change what I'm doing to, say, even as much as 50%, then I actually give up that power that I have in creating the kind of response that I have. To the extent that I take responsibility for the response that I create in you, to that extent, then I have full control or complete power to change the kind of response that I want till I get the kind of response that I want. So when we're communicating with people, the meaning of communication, regardless of what was said, regardless of how you intended it, regardless of what you thought you said, the response that you produced was actually the meaning of your communication. Now, looked at from this point of view, that makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? And I think it makes it a lot simpler, because now all you have to do is look at what you want and look at what your outcome is for the communication, and then look across at the other person and see if you're producing that outcome in them. If you are producing the outcome in them, then you're communicating the way you want to. And if you're not producing the outcome in them, then you're not producing the kind of response that you want to. Regardless of what you intended to communicate, regardless of what you said you'd communicate, the response you got is what you communicated. Telephone sales is another example. And I like telephone sales because it really is a good example of perception as projection, which we talked about on our first program. It's really interesting because it's also one of the reasons why there's such a high turnover in telephone sales. In telephone sales, people either do it real well or they go crazy and get out of the business. But the fact is, in telephone sales, there's nobody out there. You're just dealing with yourself. When there's somebody else on the phone and you think there's somebody else on the phone, then if you put the communication over onto them, the fact is you're giving up your ability to take and make that kind of change that you want to in the other person. But the fact is, it's possible to change what's going on around you by making a change inside of yourself. And William James said as far back as 1890, which was over 110 years ago now, that he said, the great discovery of our age will be that a person can change his thinking inside himself and thereby change the world around him. So the question is, how do you make the change inside of yourself so that it could make a difference in a relationship outside of you? How would you be able to change inside of you? What kind of things could you change inside of you so that you could make a change that would be reflected in people around you or be reflected outside of you? If the communication that you're communicating isn't getting the response that you want, then you can change your communication. If you had an unlimited choice of behaviors, think about it for a minute. If you had an unlimited choice of behaviors and all the time to think, do you think you'd get the response you wanted? What you want to do then is to be, of course, appropriate and ecological, etc. Now, if I've decided that an outcome is appropriate for a client, assuming it's ecological and appropriate and ethical and so forth, if the outcome is clear and certain, and if I take action, if I have enough sensory awareness of what I'm doing and I take action, then the only thing that would limit me from producing the kind of results I wanted to would be behavioral flexibility. If I had an infinite number of choices in my behavior, and if I had an infinite amount of sensory acuity, and I knew what I wanted and I took action, all of that, and I was in a positive state, then the only thing would limit me would have enough time to change in the way that the person needed to be communicated to. So what will give me enough time to communicate to that person, by the way, is rapport. And we'll be talking about rapport shortly. Milton Erickson one time said, the very best subject that I've ever had in hypnosis became my best subject after 300 repeated inductions. 300 inductions. Can you imagine that? Now, in standard hypnosis, if Erickson hadn't had the kind of rapport that he had with the person, in traditional hypnosis, they probably would not have come back for 300 inductions. I think it's very important that Erickson said that. The fact is that he had behavioral flexibility, didn't he? He had a range of behaviors, I think, that were so wide, which is probably why he could literally induce trance in 100% of the people that he met. He said, by the way, one time someone asked him, are you able to induce trance in everyone? And he said, yes. He said, I've hypnotized everyone I've ever met, and I'm still working on a couple of people. Now, if there were something that were outside of your range of behavioral flexibility, then that choice wouldn't be available to you. So behavioral flexibility is the key. That's what's going to make the difference, is communicating in a way that the person you're communicating with can hear you, that it gets through to them, that it matches their model of the world. I remember one time I had a client come to me and he had arthritis. And he said, well, Tad, he said, I hope that you don't tell me that there's going to be an instantaneous cure. And I said, well, no. I said, I don't think I tell you that. And he said, good, because if you told me that there'd be such a thing as an instant cure, he said, I would have left immediately. I said, well, you know that there's no such thing as an instantaneous cure. So how long do you think it will take you to get better? And he said, I think it's going to take me at least a year to get better. And he said, what would you say? And I said, well, I'll tell you what I think. I said, I think I would say that it would take you about a year to get better. And he said, very good. And I said, so as you're getting better over this year, I said, I wondered if we could just allow the symptomology to disappear as long as you're continuing to get better. And he said, yes, I think we could do that. He said, but if you had told me there would have been an instantaneous change, he said, I would have left the room immediately. So you have to notice and look across at what the client's model of the world is and respect that and utilize it in the process of making change. Remembering that the meaning of communication. Okay, number 13. Number 13, the law of requisite variety. Now, the law of requisite variety says this person or the system or the part of the system with the most flexibility of behavior will end up controlling the system. I mentioned already, I talked a little bit about flexibility of behavior, and I think it's real important to have that kind of flexibility, the kind of flexibility that you need, the kind of flexibility that will allow you to be able to respond to the client's needs and to change your behavior in terms of producing the kind of results that the client needs. If we strive to have greater behavioral flexibility, our results will get better. And so essentially that's what we're doing in NLP. We're simply paying attention and making sure that we have the most flexibility of behavior. Here's one thing I think is important, and I've thought about this over the years in working with clients, both in business and education and also in therapeutic settings. A lot of times we think, oh, I wouldn't dare act a certain way. I wouldn't dare produce that behavior because it wouldn't seem like I was a business consultant, or it wouldn't seem like I was a therapist, or it wouldn't seem like I was an educational consultant. But the fact is, if we're resisting producing a certain behavior, it's quite likely that that behavior is outside of our range of normal possibilities. It's quite likely that we're limited in that area. The greater the flexibility of behavior you can have, even to produce the most outrageous behavior, will increase your ability to produce results. By the way, this is especially true with kids. Who are the most flexible people on the planet? Kids. Kids are, of course. And why are they? Because they'll produce a range of behaviors that's way outside of what you think is okay. For example, you go to the mall and what do you see? A lot of times you see kids rolling around on the floor, yelling, kicking, and screaming, and producing temper tantrums. Well, I talked to this one parent, and the parent mentioned it to me. I was talking to this parent on the phone, and she said, well, my daughter seems to produce these just absolutely outrageous temper tantrums whenever we go to the mall. And so I said to her, look, the next time she does that, why don't you just outdo it? She said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, if she's, on the floor, lying on the floor, kicking and screaming and beating her feet on the floor, why don't you jump down on the floor too and do the same thing? And she said, well, I couldn't do that. And I said, why not? And she said, well, because I'm her parent. Now think about that for just a minute. If there's a behavior that you can't produce, then that essentially limits you in your ability to produce the maximum results. So the law of requisite variety is about that. It's about us as practitioners of NLP being able to extend our range of behaviors so that the behaviors we produce have the maximum in flexibility. And finally, number 14, all of our procedures should be designed to increase choice. All of our procedures should be designed to increase choice. Now, what does that mean? I think it means essentially that if a client comes to us and wants something that limits his or her choice, like, for example, I don't want to do this behavior anymore, ever. Then if we have a client, for example, who, if we're going to limit their choice, limit their capability, then I think a better solution for us as practitioners of NLP would be to produce something that increased their choice so that in addition to that behavior, they could also have another behavior. And that's it. Those are the presuppositions of NLP. They're convenient assumptions, and they're also beliefs which will improve our results. My point of view is that you should adopt them. They've made a major difference in my life just simply adopting them and trying them on and utilizing them in a way that I made them mine. And I would encourage you to do that. If you want to, you can stop the program here and go back and listen to the beginning, or you can continue on with me because we're going to talk about the prime directives of the unconscious mind.